Welcome to the Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame, which was created in 1989 to recognize the achievements of those who have made broadcasting in Wisconsin what it is today. This show will highlight the careers of 3 outstanding Hall of Fame broadcasters. Ken Beno, 2017 inductee and groundbreaking broadcast educator. The pride and joy of Marshfield, Jack Hackman, inducted in 1995. And call-in talk show pioneer and Wisconsin public radio icon, Larry Meiller, one of the newest members of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame. Like any other industry, broadcasting wants to attract the best and brightest to its ranks. And in Wisconsin, there's no one doing a better job of cultivating the next generation of broadcasters than Ken Beno. As chair of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association Education Committee, Ken's been getting high school and college students fired up about the business of broadcasting since 2001. Ken's a dedicated and joyful teacher and gifted motivator and mentor. He's a model broadcast educator, and we were pleased to induct him this year into our Broadcasters Hall of Fame.
He's a hero educator.
I think Ken Beno is the best thing Illinois has ever done for the state of Wisconsin.
Ken is a great resource for the students in media studies in this state.
He has helped shape a lot of people's careers in Wisconsin radio.
Ken Beno's made it possible for young people to get back into a business that used to be a young people's business, but hasn't been for some years.
He is making broadcasting accessible and interesting and intriguing, and is doing more for our relevancy with an emerging generation of millennials than anyone I know.
He's kept them in the game. He's kept young students in the broadcast game.
I started in radio in Southern Illinois. I graduated from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And after graduation, I went to WJPF in Herrin, which is a small station down there. I was a continuity writer, on-air person, did just about everything. I had one of the managers listening to me and actually heard me on the radio and called me up and asked me if would I be interested in moving on somewhere else. And that's how I got at the other station, which is called WINI, an only AM-only station. Got a lot of sales experience there. Then I went into education. I wanted to change the world and teach kids that sales and marketing is very important in a radio and TV station. It's the lifeblood of what happens there. So I went on to a community college called Lakeland College, as a matter of fact, and I taught there for 14 years. Then after those 14 years, I decided to switch over to the TV side for a while, and I went to Eastern Illinois University. So I went over there for 7 years and decided to go back because really radio was one of my primary interests. So I went back to Lakeland College again, and they rehired me, thank God.
I remember thinking when I was, 19, 20, 21 years old, wow, it'd be cool to do what Ken Beno does. That's so cool that he gets a chance to impact people's lives in the classroom and also in the broadcast arena as well. So he was always been a really big influence on me.
He is selfless in his devotion to students and to making sure they have the best possible opportunities in advancing in their careers. And he's also serving the industry. By serving the students who are going to be in the industry, he's actually serving the industry in a real sense.
Ken is great because he's abandoned the state of his birth and developed a loyalty to the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association. He's probably the single most effective committee chair that I have ever seen in the 38 years that I've been part of the Wisconsin Broadcasters. He's serious, he's dedicated, he's conscientious, he's effective, he's well organized, and he gets results.
I think the Wisconsin Broadcasters, too, are committed to the next generation coming up. And part of that is my radio marketing professional program. And I think our goal and objective is to get people interested in going into the fields of sales and marketing when they get out of school, because frankly, that's where the money's at. Because of Ken's work with the Education Committee and other people at WBA, it's ensuring that the next generation of media practitioners, the ones coming out of university right now, will be set up for tremendous success as they go forward. I've had over 750 students certified in the state over the 10 years I've been doing this. It's made my students much more employable, and it makes them much better candidates for high-quality internships. They see that credential on a resume, and employers really take notice.
When you think about all the things that he's done on the mic, in front of the camera, in the classroom, the people he's helped, and I'm just one of hundreds of people, if not thousands, that he's impacted along his career.
I really love what I do, and frankly, it keeps me young, even though the kids keep on getting younger and staying younger.
They come away, I think, enlightened in a very true sense, and that's the hallmark of a great teacher, and that's what Ken is.
I hope that every student who walks out of my classroom in the radio marketing professional, and really any classroom I've ever taught, I hope they walk out with a feeling that I really care about them. I'm enthusiastic. I love this business that I'm in.
Ken Beno is a job creator. He's a guy that helps people realize their potential.
Ken Beno's getting jobs for kids. That's a cool thing.
Ken has really inspired me to go down a great path, and I think the right path for me.
I hope the students that come out of the universities and work in media in this state and beyond recognize the important role he's played in their success.
Passing down his knowledge really meant a lot to me, and I know to a lot of his other students as well.
He wouldn't say, I did this, or here's something I did. It's not in his nature. But he'll talk about the programs and their success and what's being accomplished.
When he was informed that he was going to receive this award, he didn't believe it.
It came as a complete surprise.
He thought they were joking with him.
I yell at my wife upstairs, they're putting me in the Hall of Fame. So I was very, very surprised and obviously very, very pleased.
And I thought that really, that's the way that's Ken. That sounds like him. He's a humble guy and very unassuming, but he's very, very committed to the students in this state, and has their best interest at heart with what he's done through WBA and the education group there.
Your peers are saying, you're somebody special. You are not just one of the best of us, but you're one of the best of all time. And we want to be able to honor you with that. And so when you consider the contributions that he's made, it's a no-brainer that he should be in the Hall of Fame.
So, if you're looking for somebody who's helped individuals and helped the industry as a whole, and who has helped the association of that industry, you add those things together and your face and name should go on a plaque and somebody should make a nice video about you.
Hard-driven, tenacious, inspirational, and competitive. All these descriptions and more have been applied to Jack Hackman, overseer and heart and soul of the Getz broadcasting radio stations in the Midwest for more than 40 years. Under his leadership as the chairman of the board of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association, both the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association Foundation and the Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame were created, for which we are eternally thankful. So it is with great admiration and gratitude that we celebrate Jack Hackman's 1995 induction into the Broadcasting Hall of Fame he played such an important role in creating.
Well, I love radio. Always have and always will.
Jack really was a king of small market radio.
Jack was a big believer in service to the community with radio stations. Jack set an excellent example.
Just a real strong person that every person in radio should make as their hero.
In high school, Jack Hackman was a tremendous athlete. He once told me that one of his biggest dreams in life was to be a professional baseball player. That's all he ever wanted to be. And then he was struck with polio. And it wasn't to be.
And it completely changed his career. He was looking to be an athlete. And here he is in Pittsville, Wisconsin, the center of the state of Wisconsin. And what am I going to do now?
Never stopped Jack, though. He knew he couldn't be a baseball player. He did, in his mind, what was the next best thing. He became a play-by-play announcer.
He took that dream and he put it in broadcasting. And he, through his sports broadcast, I think, fulfilled that dream.
He took that energy from that unfortunate happening and allowed him to be a very good sportsman, a very good copywriter, a very good news person, and ultimately one of the, if not the best general managers of small market radio in the Midwest.
I started in radio in 1953, and I started as an engineer at the Marshfield station. And I will reluctantly point out that I was probably Wisconsin's worst engineer, if not the country's worst engineer. But it was a way to get into radio, and that's what I wanted to do. The reason I wanted to get into radio was because of sports, because I really loved doing the play-by-play.
He took that love and put that love of sports and put it in basically to everything he did. I mean, just everything that he did.
I then moved into programming and then into sales. And then eventually Nathan Getz purchased the Marshfield stations in 1965 and July of that year. And then in August, I became the station manager.
After you worked for him for a while, you just marveled at the way the guy operated.
The guy worked tirelessly. I mean, he just worked all the time.
But the biggest thing I remember about Jack was just his competitiveness, his tenaciousness. He would not give up. He would go after it as hard as he could, no matter what the situation was.
Extremely hardly driven, wanting to succeed. He had to overcome so much in his own life that he worked hard at it, and he expected everybody else to work hard at it. But he had a compassion on the flip side of that coin for what you were doing and how you were doing it and how he might be able to help you do better.
I think because of what happened to him when he was younger, it just allowed him to have a compassion for his employees.
And he would talk with you just like you were his son when you were a manager for him. And he just believed in the people that he had working for him.
He was with WDLB Radio for 40 years. Nate Getz bought that station in 1965, and he made Jack general manager. And later, he made Jack the overseer, the vice president and chief operating officer for all 12 stations in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
Nate trusted Jack to the point that he ran all the radio stations. We had general managers in each location, but Jack oversaw all the stations that were presently in Getz Broadcasting and the growth of Getz Broadcasting.
Jack was his man on the scene who could carry out the orders and do it. Nate lived out of state, and he had to have somebody here, and it was Jack. And it worked. Jack made it work.
Because he knew that everything in the corporation was being taken care of by Jack, because Jack was just a stickler for everything.
He was the type of individual that really was the heart and soul of Getz Broadcasting.
And managers in all the radio stations adored him because he had such drive and so much intensity as far as the operations of his stations.
He was the go-to guy for all of the managers in the Getz Broadcasting Company. He was the glue that held it all together. I don't think that the Getz Broadcasting Company would have been successful over such a long period of time had it not been for first Jack's contribution in Marshfield at WDLB, and then later his oversight of all 12 of the stations. Getz Broadcasting owes an awful lot to Jack Hackman.
Jack Hackman, the pride and joy of Marshfield. Jack did a fine job, was a dedicated broadcaster, not only in Marshfield, but for our association.
There were two things that I was very proud of. We started the Hall of Fame during my term.
It was his idea that we should create a Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame to recognize those who had laid the foundations for broadcasting in Wisconsin.
And then we also started the WBA Foundation both of which have been very successful and very important to the WBA, and so I was proud of that accomplishment.
One of the things that Jack Hackman concentrated on when he was with WDLB in Marshfield was community service, being involved in the community.
Jack was so involved with community organizations. I'm just amazed at the number of boards he was on in the community and organizations he belonged to.
I was fortunate that I had a solid staff behind me so that I could spend the time helping with community events, and I enjoyed it.
The radio stations had just a tremendous reputation under Jack Hackman. You know, they knew if there was something to be done in the community, Jack Hackman and the radio stations would step up and help out.
One of the things that Jack in the city of Marshfield will always be known for, over and above the Hall of Fame, was his continued love of baseball. And although he wasn't able to play the sport anymore, he was able to create a field of dreams for other young people of the future by donating a substantial amount of money to build the Jack Hackman Field in Marshfield.
What a wonderful thing for Jack. It's part of the community, part of my dream. A baseball field, the Jack Hackman Field.
You might call that Jack Hackman's Field of Dreams.
And today, there isn't a young person or a high school student or even a college student that doesn't play on that field that was never there before, but it was because of the passion of an individual that always loved baseball.
Jack Hackman has the respect of all of the broadcasters in Wisconsin that I know. Jack was truly one of our very best broadcasters in the WBA.
If you could be compared to Jack Hackman in the smallest way, you knew you were doing well.
He just was a true inspiration. Like if he would have been playing baseball, you'd want that baseball card with Jack Hackman on.
I think that being in local radio is one of the most rewarding type of professions that you could have. Radio did so much for myself and for my family, and I wouldn't change a day of it.
He was just a great, great person.
If there's one thing that listeners to Wisconsin Public Radio can all agree on, it's that they love Larry Meiller. Larry's uniquely Wisconsin personality, caring heart, and pure talent and smarts are in evidence daily on air and in person throughout the school year in classrooms of the UW College of Agricultural Life Sciences, where he's been an award-winning teacher and advisor for 4 decades. Larry Meiller simply is the best, and that's why this year he was inducted to his rightful place in the Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame.
Larry Meiller is so wonderful. He's a treasure, isn't he?
He's just like the kind of guy like you don't sit down and share a meal with, or maybe a slice of apple pie or something.
Well, as a teacher, I love learning, and and I love teaching, and so a lot of the things that I learn, I can then share with my students.
He just makes you feel very welcomed into his show, and like you're a friend.
Larry's kind. He just seems genuine.
#1 fan.
Larry Meiller is a sweetheart in every sense of the word.
He's always got a smile on his face.
He's a true ray of sunshine.
He welcomes everybody in and everybody feels at home.
He can talk about anything with anybody.
He's contributed so much to making radio worth listening to.
He's the quintessential neighbor to Wisconsin.
I'm a pretty curious person, and I think I'm not afraid to speak, that's for sure. And I love to learn new things, and so it's a job that's kind of made for me.
So the story with Larry was that he was a student here at the UW, and Maury White, who was the host of the farm program at WHA at the time, was looking for a substitute for the summer because he was going to be going away on a trip. And he asked Larry if he might do it.
And I didn't have any job prospects at the time, so I said, sure, and I wound up hosting that show
Over time, it evolved into not just about farming, but about all kinds of things that interested the listeners of Wisconsin all throughout the state. And for a while, it was called Wisconsin Here and Now.
And then at one point, Jack Mitchell came to me and said, hey, would you be interested in doing a call-in talk show?
And Jack is an incredible idea guy, and he asked Larry if he would consider including call-ins to his show. And Larry, being the game person he is, thought he'd try it.
Here and Now became the Larry Meiller Show.
Larry's idea was, let's let everybody in on this conversation because we all have something to learn from each other.
I love learning something myself every day, and I really love the interchange that I get between our audience and myself and the audience and my guests.
He is so committed to that idea of this is a conversation for all of us. This is not an exclusive conversation. This is the more the merrier.
He's hosted all kinds of shows for us over the years, including one of the national shows we did for many years, Calling All Pets with Patricia McConnell. Larry is driven at the very root by an innate curiosity. People are interesting. Animals and plants, they're interesting, and he wants to know more, and he shares that with us.
I want them to have fun learning about things that affect their daily life. And it might be the environment, it might be their garden, it might be their health, it might be books that they might like to read or hear about.
Larry's curiosity and his enthusiasm for lifelong learning, and I think that's especially what Wisconsin Public Radio is about. We bring lifelong learning to people wherever they are in the state, and Larry's really the embodiment of that.
Really, truly, Larry is a Wisconsin idea in action.
Bringing the resources of the university to all corners of the state.
Whether it's talking about bugs or travel or computers, you never know what it might be, gardening. It's that sort of common touch that uses the knowledge that comes from the university, but that is useful to anybody of any education level and that helps them have better lives.
It's always exciting to be able to talk to somebody new about something new and different every day.
What's interesting about Larry is that I think his professional career as a broadcaster is totally interconnected with his professional career as an educator. So he's been teaching information radio class in the Department of Life Sciences Communication for many, many years.
I've taught thousands of students literally in radio broadcast, and the vast majority of them don't wind up as radio broadcasters, but they learn how to communicate clearly, effectively, and that's what I'm trying to achieve.
He really truly cares about the students, and he really cares about their success, whatever path life will take them.
It's been a remarkable experience. I've made many friends over the years with those students. I do a lot of student advising too, so I have upwards of 100 or so undergraduate advisee at any one time.
Larry is a great mentor. He's willing to listen and really work with the student to make them successful.
His door, I don't know if his office door has ever been closed. He always was there, and he always said, yeah, come on in, what do you got?
I've been really grateful to have Larry as an advisor, and not just in the title, but truly as a mentor, and really gets you excited to come in and look at what your next classes are going to be and how that's going to apply to your future.
When he knows that you want to be in broadcasting, he'll get you into broadcasting, and that's what he did for me.
Larry's whole persona on the air is exactly who Larry is. He is happy to share information that he has, but he's equally happy hearing what you have to say.
His approach, and you can hear this, is he's your best friend.
It's, you know, like sitting there having a beer in front of the fireplace and talking about whatever you want to talk about, he can talk about it.
People, I think, of me as a friend. I hope they do. I mean, I feel like I'm friends to them.
I think he doesn't realize how much people feel like he is their friend, like he's their neighbor.
Because he's literally in your shower, next to your bedside, in your car, and he approaches that as if he might be sitting next to you in the car and just being your friend and chatting about something. There's a kind of magic to that.
Larry creates a real community, and I think it's surprising to people that there can be a community where you might never see the other people in that community because it's all over the airwaves or on social media.
Larry now is one of the most active users of Facebook and the internet because it helps his show to be even more interactive.
We have a pretty active Facebook now and all of the other social media kinds of things.
And it makes the show come alive in a real 21st century way.
I think we have a great community of people who are interested in Wisconsin. They're interested in making their lives as good as it can possibly be, and most of them interested in having fun, like me.
Larry is just Wisconsin. He is everything that is good and admirable about our state.
I've had the chance to fish for muskies. I've had a chance to pick apples. I've had a chance to talk to people all over this state.
And I used to tell listeners, I bet not only does Larry know where your town is, he's probably driven by and stopped for a beer.
The people of this state are wonderful people. They're hardworking. They are sincere in their beliefs. It's just a wonderful place to live. And I'd have a hard time living anywhere else.
It's hard to imagine him ever running out of energy because here he is having done the shows that he's done for 50 years.
Larry is all we could ever aspire to be.
Larry is one of the proofs that radio continues to be incredibly relevant in people's lives. And I think that legacy will really continue long past when Larry is here.
Larry will be remembered for helping us all connect with each other on the most human level. And I think that's the most any of us can ever hope to do.
The most inspiring thing for me that I can go out and see that I'm actually making a difference in people's lives, that's really a wonderful feeling.
Larry's awesome. He just is.
Well, because of Larry Meiller, I know that you can keep a lime tree alive in Wisconsin.
So I went out and got my own lime tree, which turned out to get scale, so now I have to listen to learn how to get rid of the scale again.
He's made me a lot smarter about what I'm doing out here with my yard and my garden and my animals. And he's made me a lot smarter about what goes on in Wisconsin.
Larry's made a huge difference in my life. I mean, I've learned so much from his show, and what would we do without him?
I just love Larry.
Larry's success and still perseverance in doing things so well is that he's really doing something that he truly loves, and he doesn't want to stop doing it.
And I've been having fun for 50 years. And I still don't have any other job prospects.
This program has recognized 3 extraordinary broadcasters whose career achievements have elevated the broadcast industry in Wisconsin and set new and higher standards for broadcasters as they serve the citizens of our great state. Wisconsin is an acknowledged leader in service-oriented broadcasting. Members of our Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame are the reason why. To see more of them and hear their stories, visit the Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame online at wisconsinbroadcastingmuseum.org. On behalf of all your dedicated Wisconsin broadcasters around the state, thanks for watching.